that dictates this, right?
Absolutely. And if you look at the location of the stadium from San Jose Airport, we are pretty much on the extended center line of that airport as approaches are coming in from the north.
Yeah, like separation wise, two 2.5 miles off the departure end on azimuth. So yeah, I'm sure they're super excited about that. Hey, welcome in. If you love Super Bowl flyovers, I mean, I think that's the best part of the Super Bowl, but I'm biased. Today, we're digging into how it all comes together. We have representatives from the Secretary of the Air Force's Public Affairs Office, Air Combat Command's Aerial Event. We have Thad, who's an F-22 pilot, and he is the mission planner for this Super Bowl flyover. We're going to talk the nuts and bolts that go into making this happen, the nitty-gritty details, and then hopefully we'll have a couple of the pilots join us. I honestly am getting ready to hit the road, international trip, and we're going to try to synchronize between multiple different squadrons and pilots and everyone's schedules. At least have a few of the pilots who are going to do this flyover join in and share a little bit about their perspective. There's a lot of moving pieces that make this come together, and there's, I guess, a few moving pieces that make this podcast come together. But if you're someone who's interested in learning the nuts and bolts of a Super Bowl flyover and just the level of detail that goes into it, I think you'll enjoy this episode. So with that being said, let's jump into it. Katie, thanks for sitting down with me. Doing this deep dive into the Super Bowl, I think is really interesting. There's so many moving pieces that go into this that most people have no clue. Again, the amount of moving pieces that come together. And it really starts, I think, with you and your office up there at SAF PA, the Secretary of the Air Force Public Affairs Office, bringing this together. So I would like to kind of kick it off with you. If you can give me a little bit of intro of who you are and what your role is when it comes to handling flyovers and specifically this Super Bowl flyover.
Yeah, Rain, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me. So my role at SAF PA is I am the sports outreach program manager for the Department of the Air Force. And basically what that means is I am responsible for connecting teams and leagues across every sport with our air and space assets. So whether that's a flyover, whether that's a first pitch, holding a giant flag, an oath of enlistment, whatever it is that these teams want or request, I am kind of that connective tissue between them and our asset. And then when it comes to the Super Bowl flyover, whenever the Air Force gets the flyover, because the Department of War likes to rotate services, my role is to facilitate all of the coordination with the NFL, with broadcast partners, along with our ops people on the flying side to make this flyover happen.
So obviously there is a couple things going on with the government shutdown. We could talk about that here in a minute. I mean, the last time you and I did this, fortunately did the 2018 flyover. It was so cold. This year it should be hopefully a little bit warmer for you, assuming you get out there, right? How long ago did this planning start to come together for the Super Bowl?
So we typically start when we know it's going to be our year, we start planning about a year in advance. And so we just start brainstorming of things that we want to do. And then once we're officially told that it's our year to do it, we start thinking about all of the things that go into this. And one of the first things that we start thinking about is the aircraft. What kind of aircraft do we want for this flyover? Historically, our demo teams have rotated between the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels every year. Back when you and I did this for the 2018 Super Bowl, the Blue Angels unexpectedly had to back out at the last minute. And so we were able to have the opportunity to kind of venture off from the norm and pick aircraft that A, were available and that B, made sense. And so in your Super Bowl, we were able to do the heritage flight, P-51, F-16s, and A-10s. And so as we look at the venue, that's a really big thing that we look at, if it's a dome or if it's open stadium. And we look at what's happening in the world, what the NFL has going on, what the Air Force has going on. So when we did this in Tampa, we looked at Raymond James Stadium, big outdoor stadium. So we put our bomber trifecta up there. And actually one of our lead planners, Nike, discovered that when you add a B-52 plus B2 plus B1, it equals 55, and it was Super Bowl 55. When we put up the Heritage Flight patch, so it was all of the aircraft to celebrate the Air Force's heritage, it was the Air Force's 75th anniversary, and that was in SoFi Stadium. when we did the Thunderbirds in Las Vegas. Thunderbirds are the home team. They're based out of Vegas, so that made sense. And so for this year, we are putting up a massive 8-ship formation with our joint partners, the Navy. It's America 250, it's Super Bowl 60, and so we wanted to go big. It's also an outdoor stadium, so a lot of air power with our joint partners, the Navy.
That might be a good segue to talk about like what is actually going to be in this formation. I have the patch. I'll put that up on the screen. So maybe let's dive into that aspect of what people can expect to see this weekend for the flyover.
Yeah, so we are doing, as I mentioned, it's an 8-ship formation. So that means 8 aircraft are going to be participating in this flyover. We've got 2 B-1s from Ellsworth Air Force Base. We've got 2 F-15s from Fresno in the Air National Guard. We have 2 Navy F-18s from out of Lemoore in California and 2 Navy F-35s. You will see on the patch that we have F-22s in that patch that we had designed and manufactured. And when this patch was designed and manufactured, full send on the F-22s. But real world things happen, operations things happen, and they unfortunately had to back out. And that's why we have the F-15s, which we're so grateful for. But this is just a reminder that, we have to remain flexible to get the mission done. So no F-22s, we have F-15s, and a few surprises that I think everyone's really going to like.
It sounds like it's going to be pretty epic. I'm excited to watch it. And as we kind of wrap up with your segment here, when we look at it, that's a lot of iron that's going to be in the skies. So I know when I was doing demo, people would ask me, like, why are we doing this, or what's the purpose of doing this? I mean, we're spending a lot of money to make this happen, right? I mean, that's just a matter of the fact. But let's talk about like why do we do this, and kind of what's the point of it?
Yeah, so real quick, we actually don't spend a lot of money on this. The flyovers are at no additional cost to the taxpayer because all of these flying hours are used with previously allocated funds. And so the training hours that these squadrons get to use however they see fit on training, they will use those hours on these flyovers. And that's another reason why it's so important to do these flyovers, because they serve as time over target training for our crews. And so when you think about what it is to hit that time, which is home of the brave, at the 50-yard line, that requires a lot of focus. It requires a lot of skill and precision to be at that point at that certain time. And there is no other spectacle in the world that is as high stakes and high value and high stress like the Super Bowl. The entire world is watching. So what a great way to replicate that combat stress in those environments. And another reason why we do flyovers is of course to reach the American public. I don't know why you decided to become a pilot, but I'd like to think that it's because you grew up seeing these flyovers and going to air shows, and that's what we want. We want these little kids in the stands to look up and see this display of air power and get so inspired that maybe one day they want to join the Air Force. And so people love their military and they love their sports. And this is a great way to bridge that
Absolutely.
gap.
Well, I think, again, who doesn't love the sound of freedom? And you never know, inspiring the next generation is a big piece of this and important. And when you talk about the training aspect of this, having done this many times, I can appreciate and attest to the fact that, again, I was talking like my Super Bowl flyover, and we'll talk with Thad here in a minute about some of the details that go into planning and making this happen. And you're like, oh, it's just, I'm flying over a point. There's so much more that goes into it. And there's so many little problem sets. And I'll specifically say when we did the 2018 flyover, not only we're mixing in World War II aircraft with modern fighters, communications issues. And if you were inside my brain when this was happening, and probably the interflight between me, Satan and Possum in the A-10s, a lot was going on there last minute to make sure we met our TOT. Because I jokingly said, like, if we miss this on the world stage, I'm just gonna have to turn out to the west and punch. Like, there's no way I can go back and face the crowds. And
I can't even imagine how the stress is. The stress for us on the roof is crazy with the people that do the timing and the aerial control. And I know you'll talk to people about that later, but all around, it just serves as such great training for every single person. Also, maintenance, because what happens when these crews land is these jets need to be recovered and buttoned up quick because we have to get everybody to the stadium for their aircrew recognition. So, our maintenance crews have to safely and skillfully button up these jets and make sure that they're good to go for the next morning and then get everybody in a bus and go. And so I think the reason that operations like Midnight Hammer are so successful is because our crews are doing these types of training throughout the year in such a public display.
Yeah, this is not tactical, but again, if we talk about Operation Midnight Hammer, I got a whole series going to come out on this. We talk about timing and the importance of timing and bringing together all these different assets. This is a great way, and it's a great deal, and I think it's great for America and for the American public to see this. Like, it's inspiring. So again, like, great deal, but there is a lot of value when it comes to it, and there's a lot of moving pieces, as we'll dive into a little bit further here. So before we part ways, is there anything I'm missing from the SAF PA side of the house that you think is important to talk about?
So, from a SAF PA perspective, my role is really working with the NFL and the broadcast partners and everybody else to ensure this is successful. So, you think about making sure that we have the proper credentials to get to the game. You think about parking, you think about lodging, you think about making sure that the network knows exactly where we're coming from and at what time. And then you have the PA aspect of this. So the entire week that we are there, we have things happening on the ground. We have a community day on base where we invite the community to come out and talk to our crews and look at the aircraft. We have a media day. We have a day where we go out to Super Bowl experience and visit recruiting. And this year we have a massive salute to service engagement with the NFL where our crews will go out there and help do care packages for troops overseas. We have the content plan to make sure that all of the units are being represented on social media. And that happens within the Navy, the Air Force, the NFL, OSW. You think about on the operations side, making sure that the aircraft are where they need to be on base, working with the FAA. So all of these things, I know that I sit at SAF PA and like I kind of work all of this, but it takes a village to make all of this happen. And it absolutely cannot happen without everybody pitching in and doing their part, which we are very grateful
Awesome.
for.
Yeah, we have summarized this in about 12 minutes, your role, but this is a years long process that happens. There's a lot of moving pieces and we got more to talk about. So Katie, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Rain.
All right, Steve, thanks for joining in here. Obviously, you and I go a little ways back, doing a lot of work when I was doing demo. And today I want to dive into your role when we talk about the Super Bowl and the flyover and when it comes to aerial events at Air Combat Command. So if you can give me a quick little bit of background about who you are and what your job is when it comes to the flyover, the demos, and really specifically the Super Bowl flyover.
All right, thanks, Rain. Yeah, it's good to work with you again. Basically, I work at ACC Aerial Events, so we do flyovers for all basically ACC. As far as Super Bowls, we do the aero control team. We do those for Arlington National Cemetery, but big media events, which obviously the Super Bowl is. So far as timing, we have a three-man team. I'm usually in the control booth with the timing people from the NFL. We have Thad, who you'll talk to later, is the Drago 2, be talking to the aircraft. And then we have a Drago 3, which is actually going to be at North Cal, which is the TRACON facility that will be sitting with the individual that's controlling the aircraft. So this is my fifth Super Bowl. It's a little unique for this one because I'm not doing the timing and I'm not doing Drago 2. I'm just there to help out as needed. So I'm going to pass the reins to somebody else, but I'm going to be there in support since it is my fifth one.
Well, it's like you have the corporate knowledge, and as you and I, my one and only, right, 2018, there's a lot of lessons learned that came out of that. There's so many moving pieces when it comes to putting this together. And we talk about this airspace, which I'll dive into Thad probably more so here in a little bit about just how busy this airspace is. You're stacking fighters up. There's a lot to dive in here. But when it comes to like the NFL, the control room, as a pilot, one of the big questions, like you got to know what is the time over target? What is that TOT? There's a lot happening in the broadcast world, the NFL, things are happening on the field. Whoever's singing the national anthem, like their timing could be off. Is it recorded? Is it live? Like all these things, these little details come to factor. And I think you in the control booth, you're linking that to our next piece of it, the actual flyover piece. So could you dive into maybe a little bit of like the nuts and bolts when it comes to, maybe an hour prior or the day of
Right.
as we lead up to the actual go time?
Right. So I call it organized chaos because that's really what it is in that control room. I mean, the control rooms I've been in, I mean, it's really standing room only for me, which is fine because I usually sit there with the producer and they'll sit there with the announcer. Each flyover I've done with Super Bowl has been a little bit different. The one I sat right next between the producer and the announcer, and then we would do timing. Right. So an hour out, we held what's called the Gonculator that Nike McAleer organized, and basically it's a running total that we use on our iPad of all the events that are going on. So we try to find landmark events that we call them landmarks or earmarks, like something that's recorded. So if it's the God Bless America, they know they're going to start. So if we know it didn't start on time, we're 30 seconds ahead or 30 seconds behind or 5 seconds or whatever it may be. The NFL is very good about making up time. So if we're behind or ahead, I will tell them, hey, we're behind or ahead, and they'll make that time up. Because if I say we're behind and I tell the planes we're behind, and then the NFL decides to make up that time, and now we're off. So we have to really work together with those production people and say, can you make up that time? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, yes, we'll. One year, they actually just started the national anthem over the honor guard because they said we have to make up time. So, and that was because the locker room door didn't open for 30 seconds. So there's all that little bit that goes into it. It's like, where are you going to do it? But yeah, 15 minutes out, we're pretty much locked down with different things. But yeah, a lot of things are live tracked. So they have a track in their ear. So as long as we know that timing, like the national anthem, I've gotten the timing track already. I know how long it's going to be. I know the things that are leading up to that. So we'll work with the production booth and say, hey, how are we doing on time? And they will adjust. And if it's a big adjustment, I'll relay that to Drago 2, and then they can decide whether they want to slow the planes down or speed them up. But like from before, usually when that time, they're already inbound. You really can't do much. It's like a couple seconds here and there. We can make up or slow down, but you can't turn around and do it again.
That's the piece, having a dissimilar formation makes this very challenging for many reasons. Now, fortunately for this year, they're all jet aircraft. When we had a Mustang, like once you turn in and point, maybe 2 seconds plus or minus is what you can adjust. And obviously you're being judged on the world stage by being there at the second. And I think what you talked about, and I don't want to gloss over, and I think is really important, is like those earmarks or those landmarks that you get as things are marching along. Like, again, the locker room door opening 30 seconds late because the coach just took a little bit longer time. It took an extra 10, 15 seconds to talk. All that can have a cascading effect. And for the pilots who are in the hold, those few seconds and not getting an update, like that has ramifications that ultimately they got to be champions and make it happen. But bad data in, bad data out. And there's so many moving pieces, which is fascinating. Right. What haven't I asked you that you think would be important for people to know when it comes to your linkage there at the stadium between the NFL, you, Thad, who's going to be Drago 2, and the pilots who are going to be flying this?
I think just the relationship that we've had. Like I said, this is my 5th one. I'm not really doing the timing. I'm not really doing Drago 2, but I've been through 5 of them. So I know kind of what's important, what's not important. I know when to flex and when not to flex. Because like I said, you asked 5 years ago, who flew over? They don't know. Was it on time? They do know whether it was on time or not, but they don't know what flew over. So that's the big thing. Luckily for me, knock on wood, I'm 4 for 4 so far, and we're going to be 5 for 5 next week.
I love it. Again, and the corporate knowledge, folks, I mean, again, it comes down to just a couple people, but having that corporate knowledge and that experience makes this so much better in the future. So if it's messed up, Steve, we will know who to start throwing spears at
there you go.
Down the road here.
I'll give you my fake email address.
Yeah, I'll go and put that up on the screen now. So everyone can reach out, send you a text. Awesome. Steve, good to reconnect and looking forward to seeing the flyover this weekend. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, Thad, thanks for joining, man. You're the next piece of this puzzle to bring this all together. You and I go way back again to my demo days. Now you're out there flying the Raptor, doing some really cool stuff. But when it comes to Super Bowl, you have an integral role in, I think, coordinating and making this all happen. So, yeah, can you give me a little bit of your background, what you're doing, and how you fit into this puzzle piece today?
Yeah, Rain. So my background, F-22 pilot, as you already know, I'm at Langley, and was basically asked by the A3TA team to provide the pilot input in all of the planning and help lead this thing to make it happen.
All right, let's talk big to small. So big picture, a lot of assets that you're starting to coordinate with. So who are our players for this weekend?
So players for the weekend, we've got B1s coming from South Dakota. We have the Navy supporting from Lemoore with F-18s and F-35Cs. And then we also have some Eagles from Fresno in Central California to build out this formation.
All right, when it comes to the formation and planning, like you and I being Air Force guys, typically like the largest formation we see is a four ship. The Navy, sometimes they have these like massive armadas they go flying by. But when we talk, again, from pilot training on, a four ship more or less is kind of the normal element we're going out there with fight. So all of our procedures are built around that. When we start mixing in two services, more than four jets, things get a little bit complex. So I imagine you've had some kind of coordination that has gone into this process prior to getting to this point that I think might be interesting to talk about. So what have been some of the hurdles? How's it come together? What's it shaping up as?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing we do is build out what the formation is going to look like, right? It's got to look cool. You don't want to be one on the side of, a bunch of smaller fighters. So we build out what this formation is going to look like. And then the first hurdle that really came to light was when we were talking about how we're going to get all these aircraft into the same piece of sky, into the hold, and reform to build out our formation. Turns out the Navy actually calls formation positions different things than the Air Force. So as I'm coordinating with the Navy and talking how we're going to build out this formation, I'm like, yeah, we're going to rejoin to root, then we'll bring it into fingertip. And their POC actually stopped me and was like, root. And I was like, well, like not fingertip, but not line abreast. And, they call it loose cruise. So it's combining basically these two languages and something that in the Air Force, when we go out and fly every day, we don't even talk about. No one after pilot training talks about how to rejoin. You just execute your rejoin. So things like that have come to light on how we actually build out and safely get all these jets into a fingertip formation. It's definitely been something that was a surprising, not challenge, but unique difference that we have between the two of us when we really do go fight together anytime we're going to go to war.
Yeah, you think about it too, from the fighter pilot's perspective, we're doing joint operations, coalition operations in a tactical environment, in combat, right? But we're never like coming like that close. Might be out there with some F-18s doing a strike mission, but we're going to be miles apart, deconflicted by altitude, hitting our targets, doing our thing, and we can all speak the joint language. But that is an interesting piece of just the basics of what, again, you and I would usually joke like, let's just putting your pants on to go to work. Well, we got to talk about how to put your pants on, like in detail today to go out there and do this. So what can we expect for these guys and gals who are flying in this? How is it going to look like? How are people going to get to the hold? And I'm going to pull up a map here, and then we can start kind of talking about it. But let's talk about how are they getting to the hold?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part of it started months ago, working with the FAA on figuring out where in this airspace is a good place to put 8 airplanes with as large of altitude block as we can get. And then also working with the NFL and the production teams on the direction of the flyover, or their desired direction, I should say. So working with all of those different agencies to figure out where we're going to start these building blocks. And when we were looking at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, they do flyovers all the time with Beale aircraft and Fresno aircraft, but they are typically from the north to the south. And for this flyover, the NFL and the production teams had asked that we executed this south to north. So we basically took all of the standard stuff that was already built from the FAA and said, thank you for providing these products. We want to do something completely different for this flyover. And so we basically started from scratch, and looking at the map you've got up here, as you can tell, you've got 3 major airports with San Francisco to the west, Oakland to the east, and San Jose to the south. And basically in between those, you have Levi Stadium, which is where we want to execute this flyover.
I think that's a really good point to bring up, right? I mean, it's like when I look at this, like first big picture wise, is like the complexity of this airspace with San Francisco, Oakland, how congested this is, right? I mean, it's a big challenge, right? And you're talking jets with speed limits for most technical orders allow waivers, but even still being in a fighter with a technical order waiver to operate below or above 250 knots, below 10,000 feet, controllers often don't like that. There's, so, and you're pointing at all these arrival and departure corridors too, which again, I know they don't like that either.
Yeah, we were fortunate. The FAA has been an awesome partner in this, and we have a waiver for airspeed and altitude and flying over what is very congested areas to execute this flyover. But absolutely, when I first pulled up this map when I was put on the team, I was not sure how we were going to be able to build this out to make this happen without basically stopping traffic at San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco. So that was the first was kind of the design piece of we have our jets, we know where the target is, we're working with the FAA. Now, where do we put all of them to execute this flyover from south to north? So if you look just south of the San Jose Class Charlie airspace, there's some rolling foothills there.
And I guess real quick, I should bring up too, right? Like I imagine you're like looking at like the orientation of the stadium, right? Like you obviously have to fly on azimuth down the middle of the stadium. So that's south to north and north to south. Like if I can pull up a better map here, I think aerial map, that dictates this, right?
Absolutely. And if you look at the location of the stadium from San Jose airport, we are pretty much on the extended center line of that airport as approaches are coming in from the north.
Yeah, like separation wise, 2.5 miles off the departure end on azimuth. So yeah, I'm sure they're super excited about that. That's a piece of the coordination with stopping traffic, right? Or that flyover.
Absolutely, and that's why we have the Drago 3 who's sitting at Tracon and letting them know, keeping them updated of timing, and then working with the FAA. So 10 minutes prior to our TOT, they're actually going to stop all of the arrivals and departures at San Jose for us to basically clear that corridor and get rid of any traffic conflicts as they do their run-in.
Okay.
So when we were looking at this, the decision for the hold point is just to the south of that Class Charlie airspace. If you look just a little bit to the west of there, over those foothills, it was the location we decided on. It's outside of all of the Class Bravo and Charlie airspaces. The second thing we're looking at is altitude. So when you look at it, building out this stack, it's all of the worst parts of mission planning that aren't tactics that you're doing and executing to build this stack. So working with the FAA on what altitudes we can have. So we have the surface from 12,000 feet to get all of these jets to the same piece of sky. And the other challenge we have is jets coming from different locations. So for our rehearsal that's happening before the game, we have jets coming from Moffett Field, Ellsworth, and Fresno. So getting them all vectored to the same piece of sky. And basically the way we keep it safe is everyone has an assigned altitude once they get to the hold in their block, with the B1s on the highest block, and then we stack the fighters in subsequent lower blocks. We basically build our formation out from there, kind of tanker rejoin standard, in low, out high was the overall philosophy. And then once the B1s are established and the fighters get into the hold, we just start building our formation from there. So the B1s are going to be at 10,000 feet. The F-15s are going to be at 8,000 feet. Once they're stable, they're going to climb it up, get rejoined into fingertip. Once they're there, we'll bring in the F-18s that are going to be at 6,000 feet, and then the F-35s at 4,000 feet subsequently. And then from there, slowly start working that formation down and using that rehearsal day as an opportunity for all of them to look at what those references are. I have never flown on the wing of a B-1 before, so kind of figuring out what that looks like and what feels right while still maintaining that safe separation and having a contingency if something were to happen to deconflict your jet.
So we've seen the patch, and I imagine the formation is going to look similar to what the patch formation or close to it, but you alluded to the fact of like looking good, right? Raptor, flying with a Raptor, you have your fingertip, your close in references, Hornet, similar aircraft. But when we're talking about aircraft of vastly different sizes and potentially mirroring on either side of the formation, getting everyone in the same spot is not like there is no book for this formation, right? So there's like it is happening on that practice day, getting input from outside the formation, inside the formation of like how to make this look good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we brief this up and we mission plan it, actually the outermost F-35s are kind of the owners of what it looks like to line it up. I mean, the B1 has one job, that's be a stable platform and be over the target on time. That's their two priorities there. And everyone else is maintaining their basically station keeping. And so when we're doing this on rehearsal day, those outer F-35s are going to be on the aux frequency or TAC freak, and basically making corrections to make it look good, because from the stadium, we're not going to be able to see them as they're in the hold. So they're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes in this hold to figure out what looks and feels right.
Yeah, no pressure. For the hold direction, is it going to be perpendicular to the run in? And I'll put up just real quick a rough run in with the map. So they're holding down here to the southwest, running up, 320-ish plus or minus. So is the hold going to be on azimuth, or is it going to be perpendicular to this line I've drawn on the screen?
Yeah, the hold is going to be on azimuth. So it'll be standard-ish holding. They'll be in left-hand turns with 10-mile legs, with the ability to basically that 5 by 10-mile rectangle will be protected airspace. So they won't have to go through all of their legs of holding. So when the lead B1 is working their timing, they can cut that corner if they need to basically hit the IP at the mission plan time to then start the run into the stadium.
I know you've done flyovers. So I've done flyovers. The one thing I think one of my first couple ones I was surprised about, especially in urban environments, because obviously that's where we're typically doing these, such a stadium. So in our heads up display or on the moving map, MFD, you're going to have a point that you're steering towards. But it is surprising, if you're in the stadium, you're like, oh, this thing, you can see this from outer space, maybe directly overhead from a satellite with a big old lens. But when you're running in on azimuth, to me, it's often surprising of how late of a show it will be to pick this up. And again, you might have a steer point right on the center of the field, but as a pilot leading it, like I want to be out at 5 miles, 10 miles, see the stadium to make sure I'm no kidding lined up on azimuth to fly directly over the center of the field. So I'll be curious to get a little bit of your perspective, because again, as I think about this, that would be one of the challenges in this environment, especially working down the stack, making the turn inbound, being on azimuth, picking up the field. Again, we're looking at 15, 20 miles, big formation. You are maneuverable because you're a bunch of fighters, but you don't want to be making big changes to line up last minute.
Yeah, so on that note, once they hit the IP, they're running heading to the stadium. They are on the blue line. You can't deviate left or right for timing. The only reason they would deviate would be if there was a traffic conflict that wasn't called out. But you're on the line. And the expectation is from the hold, you are not going to see that target. This map actually shows it pretty well. They're going to be over the foothills on the coast of California. And so from a mission planning perspective, when we brief this, it is a lot of Google Earth imagery to be able to basically show you're in the hold 4,000 to 6,000 feet. What are you going to see? And then starting to work big to small. The good news is the airport at San Jose is pretty easy to see from pretty far away because it's where all the buildings stop. Yep. So that's a good starting point. Pretty close actually to the line you have drawn here is the run into the stadium. So, if you're just to the west of San Jose at 10 miles, you're in a pretty good spot for that run in. But we really work it down from the push point at 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Here's what you're going to see looking at the stadium. Spoiler alert, you're not going to see it. So you just trust that the mission planning worked. You're flying the speeds, you're flying the right heading. And then we just work big to small, pretty much standard on here are some big things you're going to see. Mainly the airport on this run-in. We've got major highway intersections that can kind of help guide your eyes onto the target. And then we just keep working that in. So from 20 miles, from 15 miles, 10 miles. All right, now you're down no longer 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Now you're starting to get to your flyover altitude of just above 1,000 feet. Picking up those larger landmarks become more difficult. So we will use Google Earth imagery and basically show the route of flight on what they are actually going to see. And then fortunately, this stadium has massive parking lots. They're unfortunately on the north side, but things that are easy to see at 300 to 350 knots as you're leading this formation.
Yeah, some pilot training stuff, big to small, right? But again, that airport, the cloverleaf of the 101 there, like hopefully there's some big points to kind of get a check-in to update on that. Curious, sun angle, do you know what the sun angle is? What time of day this is going to be?
Yeah, so the flyover for the game is going to be around 3:30 in the afternoon. So hopefully not too much of a factor. But for the rehearsal, we're actually later in the day on Friday, bordering on civil twilight, depending on the timing of the rehearsal day, which will absolutely be a factor for the formation members on the north side, or excuse me, the east side of the formation, looking into a low sun as they're also trying to maintain their formation position.
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces. All right, Thad, I appreciate you diving into this. Is there anything that I'm missing from your side of the house when it comes to the mission planning? Because I would like to hit on kind of day of execution. We've mentioned Drago 2 as the call sign. That's the radio call sign you'll be using the day of, talking to the pilots in the formation. But linked together, is there anything mission planning wise that I've missed that we should talk about before we kind of talk about the actual day of execution?
I don't think so, unless you want to get into like how we kind of plan contingencies and fallouts, but we can get into that on day of execution if you'd like.
Yeah, let's kind of drive into that, because I think obviously I would imagine, right, like we talked about, is if someone falls out on Friday or Thursday, to re-roll it, not as big of a deal. When I did the flyover in 2018, I mean, I taxied an hour and a half prior to this happening, right? Like that's not a normal taxi time, just so I had so much time to go to a spare and do all the things. Because as we get closer, fallout changes the symmetry, changes. I mean, it can change a lot here. So we can dive into some contingencies here. The basic pilot stuff, I look at this and you're like, all right, if I have any kind of issues, this is a great spot to have issues, because there's long pieces of concrete all over the place. That is not always the case. So I imagine that's not as much of a factor, and it won't be a factor, but let's dive in. We can dive into the contingencies, what's happening day of.
Absolutely. So for the day of execution, we're going to have all of the jets except for the B1s at Moffett Field. On your screen here, that's just to the northwest. That piece of concrete right there. So we're fortunate enough that the location of the jets for the week are pretty much 25 miles north of where the hold is. So pretty short drive for the jets, which gives us a lot more flexibility as far as any delays and any aircraft that have to go to spare jets if they're working any maintenance issues on the ground. So for the game day execution, we'll brief it all up the day prior, and then right around breakfast in California, the B1s will be launching out of Ellsworth to get into the hold at around 3 p.m. local in California. As they are approaching the hold, they'll leave their tankers behind and get to the hold, and then once they're there, we'll launch the jets out of Moffett. And the good news is, because it is so close, we're just going to launch them about 10 minutes prior to the time we want them in the hold, and get them into the hold and build our formation. And at that point, it is pure coordination with Drago 1, who's working with the game producer and director, and then Traycon as well with Drago 3. And at that point, we're now in tracking timing mode. So we have every pregame event on a spreadsheet, and the start and the end time, and basically just following along where we are at in that list of events as we get closer and closer to the actual flyover execution. And then once we get to the national anthem, the jets will actually have departed the holding point, probably similar to your experience, prior to the artist starting to sing the national anthem. And so,
which is a really big deal. And as
it absolutely is.
You said, hey, there's no left or right for timing, which I have used that before. So kind of like once you turn in, you have to go, what is there a good checkpoint as Steve, a good, a good checkpoint prior to the national anthem starting? That's like a hard recorded time that you know you're good to press.
So at 10 minutes prior to the time over the target, that is when we establish our hard TOT. And there, at that point, there's not really much we can do because that's going to then trigger the FAA and TRACON starting to sanitize the airspace for us and stopping those arrivals and departures. So once we set that TOT, the formation's number one focus at that point is timing their turns in the hold to hit that IP for their run-in timing. And once we hit that point, they can use plus or minus about 50 knots of airspeed to keep the formation together and looking good. But once we hit that 10-minute mark, it's on to the production team and the NFL to keep us on that schedule.
Okay. Contingency-wise for fallout in the hold.
Yeah, so fallout in the hold, thankfully, our lead aircraft is the B1, and they're bringing in air spare. So we kind of have a built-in redundancy. So we have, unless something catastrophic were to happen, another B1 that will be there on rehearsal day that's going to see it all, see what it feels like, sounds like, kind of the pacing of it. That'll be ready to fall in if the B1, the planned B1 is not able to lead the formation. And then outside of that, it really comes down to we're going to take the best that we can get out of the formation while keeping it looking good and safe. So if we get one jet fallout, at that point we'll have a slightly mismatched formation. We're trying to get the most number of jets over the stadium. And at that point, the bigger concern is when that emergency happens and a jet falls out, getting them down on the ground safely becomes the priority. So potentially losing two jets so they can have some mutual support from the getting to their base of intended landing and pressing with the formation at that point. You mentioned that there are a lot of pieces of concrete, which is absolutely true. The one thing that we don't have on any of these runways in the Bay Area are cables. So if any of these jets need a cable, their closest is Fresno, at Fresno Yosemite Airport, with one of their runways having cables always strung, and then further to the south in Lemoore. So if you look, Fresno is going to be to the southeast of, basically in the Central Valley of California.
If I can do this, I haven't done it on an iPad in a while. What's Fresno's identifier? Do you know?
It's a great question.
Yeah. I'll say, that's what 10,000 pieces of, they're 10,000 foot pieces of concrete, but even still, like brake malfunction and stuff like that. I'm always having a cable and a fighter is a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And
here we go.
Yeah, so the National Guard shares with the airfield at Fresno Yosemite. So 11 right has the cables there if a jet were to need that.
122 miles.
So it's one of the contingencies that we will brief if the jets need a cable. Not as close as we would like it to be, but making the best with the layout that we've got.
I know people from California are watching this like, you're an idiot for not knowing where that is. But, I'm from Georgia. Once the flyover happens, because it's going to go swimmingly, now, these jets are they're pointed, again, right between Oakland and San Francisco. And again, it's some of the most dense airspace that's out there, congested airspace. What's the exit plan so they're not the bowling ball rolling through all this airspace?
Yeah, so the benefit of being so close to San Jose is there's actually already a departure procedure built. So they're basically going to be flying a slightly changed version of the Spartan departure out of San Jose. So they're going to make a climbing right-hand turn to get pointed back to the south, which then will kick off kind of getting the jets split up and pointed in the direction that they need to go. And so the way we're executing that is everyone will stay together as a formation and make that right-hand turn well south of Oakland and San Francisco. And for VFR references, as you're looking outside, it's staying south of the Dumbarton Bridge, which is the furthest south bridge in the San Francisco Bay. And so they'll use that as a visual reference and then to try and stay feet wet to the max extent practical while still maintaining safe operation as they climb up. The B1s are going to climb away from the ground and continue their climb to get rejoined with the other B1 and get back to their tanker so they can get home. And then we're going to have the Eagles also continue their climb, get formed together as a 2-ship, and then the 4-ship of Navy aircraft will get rejoined and basically just make fly to the south a little bit and then make a right-hand turn, direct the numbers to land at Moffett as soon as possible so we can get them loaded up and get them to the game.
Awesome. Dad, what else am I missing here?
I think that's it.
There's a lot of moving pieces. And again, we're summarizing this in about 25, 30 minutes here. But I think it gives people a taste of just the sheer volume and the number of variables and planning that goes into this. And it's an awesome thing to see come together. But again, a lot of people are being athletes. There's a lot of stuff that, again, this is not written in a book. And I think it's awesome to have Navy, the Air Force coming together to, again, make something that's non-traditional or not something we do every day. Awesome, and showcase it in front of the American public. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be awesome.
All right, man. Well, again, I guess you're the second spear that if anything goes wrong, they'll hit Steve, then you, and then they can go after the pilots. But, dude, thanks for doing this. Excited to watch Super Bowl, and it sounds like there's going to be, again, kind of a cool thing that might or might not happen that you don't always see at a flyover. So hopefully everyone stay tuned and check it out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ray.
Thanks. Yeah, not a bad deal. Glee, thanks for joining me.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, excited to make this connection. I mean, we're split across the globe here, so it's always impressive to see this come together. I know you got a busy couple days coming up. Real quick, can you give me kind of a high-level intro of who you are, your background, and what you're doing, what your role is for the Super Bowl 60 flyover?
Sure, absolutely. So my call sign is Glee. I'm a B1 pilot out of Ellsworth Air Force Base. I'm here as ground crew, basically to support the flyover, which is being led by the B1s. We're here just kind of the week leading up to the Super Bowl doing public affairs engagements.
Well, I want to talk about the formation and the B1. I know there's a lot of effort that goes into making this happen, right? The B1s are coming in from Ellsworth, going to line up in the hold. We got F-15s, F-18s, F-35s, all stacking in here. But it really falls down to the B1 making this happen, assuming they get a good hack from the ground party and the NFL. But it's a lot of pressure. But could you talk to me through, like, the B1 crew that's going to be leading the formation? What are some of the things they're doing in their cockpit to make sure that the formation is lined up, that they're turning in on time? Like, is there consideration for a 90-degree turn versus a 180-degree turn? All these little details. What's going on in that cockpit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this flight software, right, that we use obviously for our weapons releases that they're essentially using now to control their time over target, which is obviously going to be Levi's Stadium for the flyover. As far as making sure everybody's appropriately aligned, that's kind of a big trust system of hoping that we had good mission planning and good brief because you can't really see outside the windows. I mean, you can barely see a B1 flying line abreast from where the pilot sits. So I think it's going to be this really cool thing of here's all the things that we use to actually employ in combat. And again, that kind of trust in the people that you're flying with to do their job. And that's all going to obviously come together for the flyover.
A little bit challenging when you mix the formation. And again, the B1 does fly formation with other B1s. You've already alluded to, I've only been in a B1 once, And I'll say like the ergonomics, especially compared to the F-16, like bubble canopy versus, I would lack a better phrase, like the blinders are on. You can't really look
Mhm.
left and right. You are maneuverable, but you also have to be a pretty stable platform. That's a 15, 20 mile run in. What are the pilots going to be doing in the hold, like marshaling to make sure that they are a stable platform for all the other aircraft that are in this formation?
Yeah, so the 1B1 will be basically on autopilot the entire time and just working timing. If there were to be another B1 flying in formation, that's really, I think, the most challenging part because for the most part, when we are in that marshal or that hold, you're flying kind of a loose formation position to maintain timing and view of lead as much as you can from the cockpit. And then the challenge, like you were alluding to, is kind of that run in of getting back in position, right? So that closer formation for the flyover. So the challenge will really be on the wingman, honestly, for that formation.
If Dad and I already talked about this a little bit, but I think it hammers home the fact that, all right, hey, the B1 is showing up from Ellsworth to this party.
Mhm.
There's no, the briefing is going to be done via teleconference, et cetera. So I definitely think like being an athlete is an understatement when it comes to making this happen because we're mixing Air Force and Navy. You and I use different terms than the Navy would use for formation
Mhm.
position. So whittling all that down to make sure everyone's on the same page. Maybe talk to me a little bit about the briefing aspect of what the B1 crew has got to do, when it comes to kind of leading this formation and briefing it. How's that coordination piece go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the hardest part of the brief is going to be hashing out, like you said, kind of the differences and the way that we talk and the way that we approach flying. So I know that there is a brief prior to the mission brief where most things that we would kind of go over as standard, like taxi, takeoff, whatever we're doing in the hold, right? When we brief those things in a B1 sortie, we just slap a standard and then we move on to kind of the bread and butter of our sortie. But I think there's about an hour dedicated to here is the stack. Here's where I expect everybody to show up to the marshal. Here is how I am expecting you to fly. Here's how I'm expecting to get the formation together on the run in. And I know that our flight lead at Ellsworth has been in talks with the Navy folks and the other Air Force players for probably about 3 weeks, just over this, going over the nuances of all the different aircraft and trying to kind of meet in the middle of maneuverability, kind of what airspeeds we want to fly for us, what wing sweeps. So it's kind of merging of the minds of all these things of you tell me about your airplane and I will figure out the best way to get all of us across the finish line for the flyover.
Okay, as I wrap up here, the B1, no heads up display, correct?
That's correct. Yes, we're old school. We don't get the
Uh,
fancy stuff.
right. Okay. But here's my thing. Even doing a flyover with a heads up display and you get a green diamond on the target, or, in this case, the stadium, which you want to fly directly over, you can line up on it, but it still requires that visual acquisition to really make sure you line up and kitting go down the center on of the stadium on azimuth. So in the B1, maybe you talk about a little bit of how the B1 probably still trains to this aspect versus how the pilots who are going to lead the formation, maybe some of the challenges they're going to have to overcome to make sure that they are no kidding down the center of the stadium, not having to make big adjustments in game to do that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is going to be this is kind of where our Wizzos and the back come in is when they design our route and build it. We obviously all as a crew overview it, but the Wizzos will pick the run in heading and our flight software will basically wing kill the heading for us to fly over. But yeah, you're totally correct. It's definitely up to the guys in the front to just look outside. And, something we're so pigeonholed to is not flying VFR or by looking outside a whole lot. So yeah, visually acquiring the stadium, ensuring that we are running in and if the route doesn't look right, then you click it off and you hand fly it and you make the flyover look good because it's important. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, no pressure. All right, Glee, before we wrap up, is there anything I'm missing that I should be asking you, especially from the B1 perspective?
oh man, I think our wing sweep is like still up in the air. I don't know if Katie told you too. Like the second
Oh,
B1 is like supposed to be a surprise, so it's going to be like the one B1 leading the flyover, and then I think they're planning on a second B1 doing like a point 0.9 pass, kind of as like a woohoo surprise. Um, yeah, from a B1 perspective, honestly, I feel bad saying it's pretty simple. Like we're going to be in the Marshall and hopefully all the other players are there. So I think you kind of knocked it all out of the park.
yeah, perfect. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Great to connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. Enjoy Dubai.
Absolutely. All right, Sparkle, thanks for taking the time, man. I am excited to talk about the Navy side of the house when it comes to this flyover, because, again, this is something that we don't do all the time. A lot of joint coalition operations, but when we talk about flying in close formation over the biggest sporting event in the world, not your average Monday or Sunday, rather. So thanks for taking the time to sit down today.
Yeah, thanks, Rain. Honored to be here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it is a unique experience from a mission planning perspective for sure. Working with the U.S. Air Force elements to ensure that we have a precise and professional flyover and doing it safely is what we're looking to achieve here. And it's been a lot of communications with myself and the U.S. Air Force lead planners on making sure that we do this professionally, safely, and we provide a spectacular product for the Super Bowl event. And we're really excited for it.
Spectacular product, right? I mean, this is the deal. Like, on time, there's some variables that are just out of your control. And Thad and I talk about this in detail. And like, for me, when I did my flyover, getting that good time, like the mark that like everything from this point marches forward on timeline, and there's no Rolexes, because Thad mentioned you guys cannot jink left or right. And once you turn in and point inbound, like the ship has sailed, and like this thing is going over the stadium. So there are a lot of pieces that's happening with the NFL, with the network, to make sure this is on time. But talk to me from the Navy side of the house, from your perspective, when you looked at this laydown, what were some of your initial thoughts? What are some of your concerns, perspective wise?
Yeah, you hit on a couple of them right there. So the great thing with the Super Bowl is how well scripted it is. And so there's not flexibility really on the TOT. We do have the soft TOT, and I expect a hard TOT to be set no later than 10 minutes prior to the actual push. But we're not expecting a high deviation for us. So really that the big piece is managing the formation to push on time with all the elements that we have flowing together to make that happen, right on the second that we are supposed to execute over the stadium is, one of the lead planning factors. But what is a great thing for this is we're not expecting a huge deviation once we get that TOT, because the NFL production team wants to keep us on that specific on the second time on target. But the concerns, is really one, as you alluded to, we don't have the ability to turn. We can't use geography to update or use our timing. And this goes back to our training days when we were doing, at least our equivalent of bomb training TOT. Well, I'm going to make myself a route and I can cheat a shortcut this way, or I can take a longer route this way if I need to make that happen. We have a straight run in time. We have a small window of airspeed changes that we can make between 300 and 350 indicated, which doesn't really buy us a lot of TOT. And then speaking specifically with the formation and the different type model series, that B1 can get up and go. And, the F-18s, who are flying in the middle of the formation don't have that same type of acceleration. So there's going to be a lot of communication that is going to occur with us and the Air Force planners. And that's been part of our mission planning building block process to make sure that we are able to break this down between the Navy and the Air Force, and that we are all speaking the same language, and we're building past on how we speak differently in formation talk, rendezvous talk, and then getting into the set formation. And so when we push and hit TOT, we're all set and ready to go, and it's looking great out there.
So here's the piece, and you kind of hit on it a little bit. I like to dive into it. You and I, if we were flying this in a different role, doing joint operations or coalition operations and doing a deliberate strike somewhere, right? Like, hey, here's the whole point. Here's the push time. Here's the TOT. Here's the stack. And like, while there's definitely more that goes into it, we're basically going to show up, do our job, and do it on time. And we have contracts. Now, this one, showing up to the point, on time, working into a formation together, and the fact that while we speak pretty much the same language, we call formation positions and formations themselves slightly different. I might say fingertip, you might say close. I might say root, you might say loose, or some variation of that. That's the stuff that we don't even talk about as fighter pilots. That's putting your pants on to go to work. But now we got to talk about how to put your pants on to go to work. So What are some of the challenges on the Navy side of the house? What are some of the difference? How do you guys modify that to, I guess, cohesively talk and get in a close formation and fly over this point at a certain time?
Yeah, that is a lot of the discussions, leading up to this week that I've been having with that on, when you say route, we say loose cruise. What does it look like for us to safely rendezvous, fly in a formation that's going to descend from a high hold or medium hold, down to a low hold, with all those aircraft on the wing of the lead aircraft. And then once we're established in the low hold, how are we going to shift the formation to what we're going to be flying over the stadium with? And then the other piece is, how do we communicate interflight with each other to tighten up the formation and adjust it as necessary? Not only worrying about, the small, minute changes that we need to make in order to hit TOT, but also, do that, also tweak formation, tighten as we need to. Is definitely something we've been working through. And, as those aircraft push, they're going to be athletes. It's going to require a lot of professionalism, and this is what we get paid the big bucks for, because it's going to look cool and it's going to look simple, but everyone involved is going to be working hard to make it look that way. And so I think the first thing we had to hash out was, how do we get everyone safely in the same piece of sky, and how do we get everyone safely joined up? And that's where some of the loose cruise and route formation discussions, and that's when Thad and I started to realize, like, we need to speak this as plainly and as simply as possible. And that kind of allowed us to talk through it in greater detail, but it also gave us the ability to really thoroughly walk this through, because as you mentioned, if I'm doing this in my own element, I'm working only Navy aircraft, we don't have to worry about talking formation speak. But by being able to walk through it step by step gives us the ability to, actually really understand this in great detail, from everything from just launch sequence plan to launching, and then to the moment that we were pushing and then hitting TOT. And then, the other piece is, we fly over that stadium, we also need to safely separate from each other, and what that formation is going to look like, altitude deconfliction game plan, who's going to land first, who's going to land where. So it really came down to Thad and myself just talking as plainly as we could. What's great is, we both have a lot of experience working inter-service with joint operations, and we're not afraid to ask the dumb questions with each other as we need to, because we both have the same objective in mind, which is we want this to be safe and professional. And so the professionalism, he has displayed, that Katie has displayed, and the ability to just speak plainly has been kind of how we've broken down those barriers. Just being able to openly talk to each other and walk it through slowly, I think is, the key for our success in this endeavor.
Yeah, I was thinking it was like, you guys are operating at the NFL level when it comes to flying fighters, right? But now it's almost, you have to take a step back to be at a JV high school football team and talk about the basics just to get through, right? Again, so there's a little bit of a mind shift that's required to do that, and like jump back to the flight school days, which I haven't thought about in a while. I'm sure you're probably the same.
And
I want to
you bring up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So go ahead. What do you got?
And you bring up a great point about we're used to flying. You go back to the training days for your type model series. All of our F-18 pilots know where to look on an F-18, where to fly the perfect form.
Yes.
And you have the same thing in your aircraft with the Viper. So all of our F-35 guys know to work on an F-18, which is a dissimilar aircraft, because we're used to flying each other. But when I'm looking at an F-15 or a B-1, how do I position myself and what sight picture am I looking for to keep that a tight formation? And then, Thad and I talked in detail on, if the formation needs to be corrected, what is that comm going to sound like, and who's responsible for that comm? And so when someone says either, Drago 2-1 shift right or left wing shift right, who's you got to know who's doing that. So the other aircrafts maintain position, maintain airspeed, and continue to fly at a low altitude ingress and do it safely.
Dude, I think that is That hits on a great point. Dan and I talked about this briefly because I think the F-35s are supposed to be the outriggers in setting the formation, right? That's what the plan you guys have come up with.
Correct. Yeah.
From my demo days doing flyovers with dissimilar formation, I did not have a full appreciation of dissimilar formations and making them look good. Like when you fly with a P-51, that's actually a pretty small plane, even compared to an F-16, let alone an F-22. So you have to figure out like, what are my close in references? But then two, I got to fly honestly in different positions. Maybe I need to be further out in the F-16 when I have a Raptor on the other side of a Mustang to make the spacing look better and good, because I can be really close and tight in a small F-16, but a Raptor can't. So the F-35 guys in this formation have a lot of responsibility and I think a lot of pressure to, like, again, not only how do you communicate this, but how do we get this formation to actually look good from the ground? There's no textbook for this one.
No, we work operationally with each other in a joint environment, but it's not for this specific mission of flying form. And like you talked about, and we do have the rehearsal that's going to help out. And there's going to be a lot of great lessons learned that come out of the flight. The other thing you don't normally think about is, what is the throttle response like out of an F-15 versus my F-18? What is the B-1's throttle response going to be? So if we are accelerating or decelerating for any reason, how does that aircraft slow down compared to my aircraft? Like, these are the adjustments that they're going to be making real time approaching the stadium, and not something that we, as you pointed to, like, we just take it for granted because we're so used to flying with our aircraft in a tight formation. And, that is a routine thing for us coming back, whether we're launching from the carrier or launching from our home station. And so those are the items that we're going to be, covering in detail when we do this brief for the rehearsal flight on, hey, we need to accelerate. What does that look like? And making sure that we are covering, the most basic airmanship questions between all the aircrew in the room, not only from a professional perspective, but from the safety perspective, is going to be critical for us.
The practice day is huge. I remember out of mine, I was actually flying in the slot, which is not a normal formation position that we fly in the Air Force. It's quite great too having the Navy involved in this, because when I see you guys come back from a deployment, it's always like an armada in the sky, like 36 ship, formations, and the Air Force just doesn't do that. But when I did the Super Bowl flyover in 2018, again, I'm flying in the slot, and out of the practice day, determined there was an onboard camera in the Mustang looking back, and like, hey, you have to fly high, right? Mm-hmm. Which is not the spot you want to be. So I was actually above the Mustang, but in order to do it, it's like we had to massage this formation differently because it's dissimilar and things are different. Before we kind of wrap up here, I would like to maybe talk some of the nuts and bolts getting from the hold down to altitude and then on the run-in, the timing piece of this, because again, we've talked about it a little bit. Once you guys turn in point in, the ship has sailed. So unlike Operation Midnight Hammer or any of these like typical operations where, hey, we got a TOT and at 15 minutes prior, it's fixed. This one, you guys are rolling in and you're kind of at the whim of the NFL and the network to make sure they don't change anything up. So talk to me through the timing piece running in.
Yeah, and that's going to start basically as we get joined up and we do our slow descent to the low holding altitude. All our systems have a mission computer that's going to do the math for us. And so then it becomes down to geography. And so you want to start your timing to make sure that the formation is straight and level when you need to push, knowing our ingress distance and our ingress airspeed. Where this can get kind of fallen away is if we are out of position or off circle from where we need to push. And so we build that backwards by being early. And so being early and having the ability to do a few turns in that low hold is going to give the ability for all the aircrew to measure their own timing, but see, if each turn and hold takes this many seconds and I need to be at this point, do I need to tighten my turn? Do I need to loosen my turn? But that then also brings in some of the things we already talked to. So if we're going to tighten that turn, which aircraft, how is that going to look for the B1 as they tighten compared to the F-18? Was there ability to tighten that turn? And never mind the fact that you probably have a left wing component flying left echelon that is uncomfortably looking up at the sky with not a whole lot of space beneath them during that moment too. And that's probably the most critical point for achieving success here is managing that low hold, managing the timing that it takes. So when we get ready to make that final push, that we are on time for that straight in run in heading. And we already talked about there's not a lot of slop. So yeah, we can adjust a few seconds plus or minus, once we push. But where we need to make the timing happen is going to be in those low hold turns. We have a lot of practice with that on the carrier. So when we are recovering at night or in inclement weather on the carrier, we push on a specific time and our pilots are trained to make that holding work. But you're usually by yourself and you're not flying with 6 other aircraft. And so if your timing's all dorked up, you have the ability in your own jet on your own sanctuary altitude to make a little bit of G maneuver happen to get where you need to be in the same piece of sky. We have the ORM risk now. We have to assess how's that going to work with the big formation out there, and it's cool because this is challenging, and we want it to look great, but challenging ourselves like this, making our brains think outside the box, trying to think of ahead these problems, that's what's going to lead to success for everybody out there.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Thad about the hold on azimuth. I for whatever reason, my program was always like holding perpendicular because I turn across the circle, but coming from the F-16 to Block 50 and shooting harms, doing preemptive shots with the harms, there's a lot you do as a wingman in making sure you have your PET timing, the preemptive shot timing. And so there's always different hacks that we bring to. I brought with me like, I know how long it's going to take me to turn. But, again, when you're throwing in dissimilar formation, like you said, you can't just square the corner and be like, I'm fixed, like you gotta worry about everyone else out there too. So Sparkle, am I missing anything? I know there's a lot of moving parts, but from a high level and your perspective, anything that I should be asking you?
We talked about it, and I know we're covering the mission planning perspective piece. I don't think we're missing anything, Rain. It's the coordination and just the language barriers. We have those. We're talking to each other. Thad and I and the rest of the team, we're going to be going through the rehearsal brief today. And then we are doing it a day prior to the actual rehearsal itself to give us that time and lead turn to be able to walk through these problems. But outside of that, it is a completely awesome experience, and we're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's thousands of Navy sailors and American airmen that are touching these planes and the mission to make this happen. So it's cool. Now, all you guys got to do is just make sure you show up on time over the stadium. No big deal. So, Sparkle, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing what it looks like at the end, and can't wait. Have a good ride.
It's going to be great.
See ya.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Sheldon, man, thanks for sitting down with me. It was awesome to talk to Sparkle, get an initial take on the Navy side of the house. We've dug pretty deep, I think, into the Super Bowl flyover. And I mean, realistically, actually, probably just scratching the surface. So now, your role in this formation, flying a Super Hornet. Can you talk to me about what some of the things you're thinking when you first, got told, hey, you're doing this? I'm sure there's some excitement, but dive into, all right, hey, we got to actually make this happen. So what was going through your mind? What were you thinking about in the initial wave here?
When I initially found out I was doing it, my first thought was, man, I hope the Seahawks make it. Being born in Seattle and going to Washington, I was stoked. And I'm glad to see it, that they have made it. As far as what's going on now and what the first steps were, are you talking coordination piece with the Air Force and with the other guys in the Air Wing?
Yeah, I mean, I would we've kind of talked coordination, which I would dig into that, but even just from a fighter pilot's perspective, like when I look at a map at that airspace, right? You got San
Oh
Francisco,
yeah.
Oakland, Jose. I fly in there a good bit, and now you got bunch of jets, high speed, and as you do this south to north, you're pointed at all the arrival and departure corridors. Like
Oh
this
yeah.
is a congested piece. So when I see this, I'm like, all right, one, I gotta hit the time on time over target. Otherwise, I can't go back and be in the squadron. I'll never live that down. But two, like to execute this, this is some of the most congested airspace in the country. So
Oh yeah.
what are some of your thoughts around that when you're thinking this?
Obviously, like you said, you hit on it. Like there's the Class Bravo here, the big one for San Jose as well as for San Francisco International. Speed restrictions there is a big thing. We've been in talks with the FAA to make sure that we're able to go the speeds we need to. And there's also a discussion piece, not only with the B1s there for like climb out airspeeds, join airspeeds, all of that, but also just between F-18 and F-35. So all of that goes into consideration and our discussions with the FAA. Now, what's making our life a lot easier is that we're getting the TFRs. So we will basically have TFRs around the airspace here and around the airfield. So when the day comes, we will have the airspace to ourselves. Now, for the practice on Friday, we've got a brief with them this afternoon. We're going to see what they're willing to give us. But there is a big piece there, and we're having ATC come down. We're talking to them in person, making sure they know what we intend to do and what block altitudes they're going to be able to give us. But that is a big piece to make sure that we're adhering to the limits that they're putting on us, particularly in this congested airspace.
When I was talking to Sparkle, he mentioned the Hornet and maybe the acceleration piece. Now, if we just look at the Hornet loves to fight slow, the Viper loves to fight fast. There's differences inherently in the design of these aircraft that make it challenging. So from your perspective as a Hornet pilot, what are some of the talks? What are some of the thoughts that are going into managing, hey, we're out of position a little bit, speed up, give me one, push it up. What has that been like so far?
It's basically just been a back and forth between us and the F-35s and us and the B-1s as well. We have, gauge numbers that we'll use when we're flying with other Super Hornets, right? Like I'm sure you had them when you were flying the Viper. If I'm in a descent with another Super Hornet, we're similar configured. I'm not bringing the throttles below like 77% N2 RPM just to give my wingmen room to move the throttles and give them some play. Now for the F-35 and the B1, we've been having to have discussions with them, and we'll have more this afternoon. We just got the B1 folks in today, so we're going to have discussions on like getting down to the nitty gritty. Okay, what RPM can we go down to in order to be able to hold these speeds, in order to be able to hold them in a descent? It's not just the engine performance, of course, as you know, but it's also the drag on the jet. So like as we get, Sparkle touched on it a little bit, like the big thing there is going to be getting from high and medium holding down to low holding. And getting the descent down there from our holding point to the airfield. There's going to be a tendency for the slicker jets, notably the F-35s, to want to accelerate. And they're on the outside, so we can't have them getting ahead of everyone else. Just like the Viper, they're a slick jet. They're able to add energy pretty quickly. So those are the kind of discussions we're having. We don't have a number yet for the B1s, but we'll be able to get that this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm thinking depending. Glee mentioned that I guess the wing sweep was still up for debate for the B1, but now I'm thinking like in the hole doing a left-hand turn, whoever that like inboard F-35 is, just like idle. I mean, like even needs more idle because like you said, the F-35 is such a slick jet, it doesn't want to slow down. So now if I'm that inside guy or gal on the formation, I would imagine that is probably going to be a spot I would not want to be in.
Yeah. And of course, what we want to do is avoid having to make them use boards. That can be an uncomfortable position to be in and can make you have to come up on the throttles in a way that you don't want to use more gas during that maneuver.
Yeah. So let's talk about managing the formation and making this look good. What are some of the details to make this formation come together? There's no textbook answer for a mix of B1s, F-15Cs, F-18s, and F-35s. So how do you make this look good?
Yeah, great question. The big thing here is that we're going to fly. It is a non-standard formation of aircraft, and so you have to fly a little bit non-standard form. For at least for Navy guys, when we come into the break over the ship, we are snuggled up in parade as close as you can get. Your wingtips are just maybe a foot apart, and you're trying to look good for all the guys on deck and keep it tight for all the other folks in the stack, so that you're not just taking up space overhead the ship, since it's a visual pattern. I'm sure it's the same for you guys when you come into the break here at the field. For a maneuver like this, or for like flyovers coming back home for homecomings, you actually want to fly a loose cruise instead of parade. The reason being is that you don't want to have if you have folks that are snuggled up super close on one side and then folks that are flying a little bit looser on the other because, say, they're on the inside of the turn or they're just having trouble staying in position based on sun angle with the lead, you want to be able to give them some wiggle room. So you can't have folks super close on one side, super spaced out on the other. So you'll actually fly a loose cruise, which is looser than what we would normally fly with F-18 to F-18, F-35 to F-35, or Viper to Viper for you guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to fly a little looser just to try to give everyone a little bit of play and have everybody evenly spaced across the formation so that it looks the best from the ground.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I think having you guys in this definitely helps with the dissimilar piece. Because again, coming back, I've always seen like an E2 out front and there's like 12 Hornets and F-35s on the wing. Something that the Air Force just typically doesn't do that often. It's always usually similar, or the dissimilar piece is like you're on the tanker, but you're not doing that for show coming back home station. So as a Hornet pilot, what's like your biggest concern to go up and execute this? Or greatest challenge? Concern might be too dramatic, but challenge.
Yeah, maybe the greatest challenge. I think that is just the coordination piece of the joint itself, which Sparkle talked about a little bit, but we're all holding on different altitudes, which we're used to, right? When we're joining on tankers or holding overhead the boat, we've all got different altitudes that we're going to be holding at. And now we need to facilitate, there's basically a section on all the altitudes, and we need to facilitate all of those sections basically going up to join the B2 in kind of a spiral there, or join the B1 in sort of an upward spiral. So that's going to be a visual maneuver. We're going to be looking up, which is a difficult way to judge distance, particularly if the sun or the environmentals are fighting against you, as you know. So I think that just as a member of the formation and leading another Rhino around, that is going to be the most difficult piece there, is just facilitating that join expeditiously and safely. You're always having to balance those two, which are in conflict with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the beauty of this too is like, unless something crazy happens, I imagine it should be severe clear and the weather's really good. You have to facilitate visual rejoins versus running radars. And that's a whole other can of worms that maybe not in this environment you guys will have to face, at least hopefully not, because it's gone sideways at that point. Yeah. But what else? What am I missing, from your perspective that you think would be important to hammer home, whether it be, just administrative, the execution piece of this, or from an F-18 pilot's perspective when we look at this?
I think just the really unique piece here to hit on is the Navy and Air Force do a lot of coordination in different theaters for our operations and our mission sets. But a lot of times those are geographically displaced from each other, or at least we're not, basically the closest I get to Air Force aircraft generally is when I'm joining on a tanker and taking gas from them. It is very unusual for us to go and fly close form, even a loose cruise on a bomber. So that is a pretty unique opportunity and something that we will never get to do. I will probably never do it again in my Navy career. So that is something super unique, something I'm very excited to do. And I know a lot of the folks here are as well.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday, just like crush it and, represent America and all that's great about it. So Sheldon, thanks for taking the time today, man. It was an honor to be able to connect with you, and good luck. Everyone's watching. I'll be judging and watching. So good luck out there.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.